Welcome to the Rational Egoist. The show is called Rational Egoist, so obviously rationality is a big part of that. But one of the things that can trip us up in our quest to be rational are cognitive biases. I was on a quest to get somebody to come on the show to be able to talk about this, and I am very confident that I found the right person. She is an associate faculty member in the University of Arizona Global Campus Psychology Department. Jessica Koehler, PhD, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
But I guess the first thing to do is define it. What exactly is a cognitive bias?
So it's interesting based on the title of your show. It's really a deviation from rationality and thinking, right? So it's our brain has this tendency to want to take these mental shortcuts, which we call heuristics, to make sense of things more quickly. So we want to kind of look at when we're looking at these complex situations that are coming at us, it's just overwhelming for us to comprehend everything. And it's really the way for the brain to be able to really quickly make sense of the world in all different domains, right? And I like to always, as I'm a professor of psychology, right? Like I think about examples of what is a heuristic and trying to help students understand that, like what are those mental shortcuts? And we can think about like a really practical example of that is when we think about something like if someone asks you the question, which is further west, Reno, Nevada, or San Diego, California, right? Most people just automatically are like, oh, I'm sure San Diego, right? Because California is west of Nevada. But no, it's not actually, right? We use that mental shortcut, that really quick information that we have to try to make sense of the world quickly. And that's just what cognitive biases are. That's a really simplistic example for the proliferation of biases that are out there that hopefully we're going to get into. But it just really is our brain's way of trying to take all of the information coming at us and quickly make sense of it without having to go through like a really analytical, rational framework, right? It's the sort of automatic default for most people, although I tend to think that some people some people are much more likely to rely on those heuristics versus others that are more likely to go to that analytical type thinking. But that's just kind of an overview of what they are. And I mean, most people at this point in time have heard quite a bit about certain ones like confirmation bias, availability heuristic, hindsight bias. There's so many, and I feel like there's constantly more being added to lists I see like in psychology, but I'd say some of the ones that hit us the hardest, especially in this day and age with social media, especially confirmation bias, is just everywhere.
Now, it seems there has to be an evolutionary reason that we have these biases. I mean, if you're living in the jungle, 100,000 years ago or whatever, and you've got, the threat from wild animals and other tribes, you don't always have the time that we have in the modern world to sit back and reflect and think about things. So you have to make snap decisions, but there's no guarantee those decisions would be right. Is that kind of how we ended up with these?
I love that you asked that. Yeah, I like to look at things through that evolutionary lens all the time. And I think that is, that is a very good logical explanation for how these have, how we've adapted to have these mechanisms that seemingly are, everywhere. They're so prevalent in all different aspects of even the most rational people, like I like to consider myself, right? Like I'm always catching myself, even falling prey to them. But yes, through an evolutionary lens, we wanted to be like, we're out in the, with our tribe, right? And we don't want to step out of line too much. And we have to be able to think quickly, right? What was more important was being safe, right? Rather, staying, we didn't want to, this is also, I like to get into like conversations about our greatest fear as human beings is uncertainty, right? Like all of these evolutionary sort of artifacts are probably based on, how we lived early on. And we're kind of, hopefully evolving away from them in some ways. But yes, these mechanisms seem to be, like I said, artifacts of this this time when we needed to make these decisions very quickly without going through that more analytical framework of like, well, let's go through like a decision framework to figure out if we should be scared of that saber-toothed tiger that's out there, or we shouldn't. Obviously we should be, right? So but the problem, of course, is we don't live in that environment
No.
anymore. And we don't live in anything like that environment, but we still have, I mean, I like to like, it's kind of akin to like, when we think, I've done a lot of reading and research. I'm a psychologist, but I know a lot about nutrition, and it's like nutrition, right? Like so much of our problem is that our bodies, our metabolisms haven't kept up with the changes in what's available, right? Like our modern society is so different than what it once was. And we haven't adapted as quickly. So we have these biases, these heuristics in place because they were really important to keeping us safe. But now they seem, of course, they're still helpful in certain regards, because if you're constantly trying to be like over analyzing every little thing, that can be problematic too, right? You're not going to get through the day. So there's a reason to still utilize these mental shortcuts in some ways, but I think that the key is knowing when it makes sense to use your like quick decision making versus when you should be using your analytical thinking more so. And that seems to be problematic. And I also think another really big problem we're having right now, as I just got off of Twitter, well, X now, right? It's just like just how much I'm just constantly scrolling through everything, and it's kind of fun to pick them out, right? You know, you just pick out, wow, this is, you know, you're seeing these play out so much in real life as with social media. And I don't know where this is going to go. Like, it's fascinating. Hopefully, we're going to move to a point where there's a better understanding of the problematic nature of these biases, but I don't know. I don't know how helpful I am at this point.
You mentioned confirmation bias, availability heuristic. One that I find kind of intriguing is belief perseverance. Can you just tell us what a few cognitive biases are and how they might trip us up in our everyday lives?
So I think the one that I see most often, both, you know, just being on social media, whatever, talking to family members, mostly extended family members, is confirmation bias. It's like seeking out information that already confirms the beliefs that you have, right? Like you seek out information and then you sort of discount other information, right? You give less consideration to alternative possibilities. I have family members who, I'm someone like on a political, I like to read things from across the spectrum, right? But it is very cognitively uncomfortable for many people to read or be presented with information that conflicts their already, you know, previously held beliefs, and they just refuse to do it. They refuse to do it, so they only read what they already believe, right, to confirm their own biases. Then they share it, right? Like, and it just becomes this sort of loop of an echo chamber that we are constantly seeing. And, you know, I've had family members and friends just flat out refuse to read information from sources that they felt were, this particular person was, that they felt that were particularly right-leaning, you know, politically right-leaning. They refuse to read them. They won't even like, they just absolutely won't read anything that kind of is in line with what they already believe. Obviously, you can see how that's problematic. How are you ever going to like learn that? And then, I mean, belief perseverance is very, very much related to that. It's just holding on to, even in the face of evidence, right, from different sources, holding on to your previously held beliefs and being unwilling to alter them. And I'm sure, you know, you and I probably both encounter this all the time. I'm sure we've even done it ourselves, right? We have really strong beliefs about certain things. And when you're presented with information that doesn't align with your beliefs, and it is, you can kind of, from your logical part of your brain, you know that might actually be, you know, like maybe it is peer reviewed research or something that totally conflicts with something you feel really strongly about. How does that feel? I think about it as being like cognitively uncomfortable. And I think different types of personalities of people kind of, you know, meet that uncomfortable cognitive feeling in different ways. Some people, it makes them really upset and they just want to shut it down. They just want to shut everything out, right? Other people, I'm someone who like, I'm like, huh, that's interesting. Like I like to be challenged, and I also like to challenge people, but you find that a lot of people don't like that. And I think that that's, that's a little bit about confirmation bias and belief perseverance. You were asking about like, I think I can't remember the other one, but there's so many like availability heuristics,
That
like,
was it.
okay, so like how likely you see something happening, it makes you feel like that it's more important if you see it happening more often, right? Like if it's easily pulled to your mind, and it's readily available, you think that it happens more often than it does, right? There's just a ton of them. I'm trying to think of them. Um, halo effect. If you meet someone for the first time and there's some positive quality about them, you tend to overestimate and like think positively about them, right? But there's also the opposite of that. And that kind of goes to that first impression type of, it really is important to make a good first impression, because there's a halo effect and there's a horns effect, right? A horns effect is if you make a really bad first impression, it's really hard to get over that, right? It's really hard to get past that initial feeling that someone has about you. Cognitive dissonance is a good one, right? Like cognitive dissonance is sort of like that discomfort when you have two different beliefs in your head that conflict, right? And I see this all the time, like again in the political and just all different realms of life, but definitely in the political realm. And you have to like, people do all kinds of things. They have to change their beliefs about something, or they change their feelings about something, but it's like sort of like what I like to call mental gymnastics to get through cognitive dissonance. And I don't mean to be like saying these like I never fall prey to them, because I
Sure.
do, right? I'll probably, especially from a parenting perspective sometimes, but fundamental attribution error is one I like. I'm always telling my husband, like we'll be driving and he tends to be driving more than me, and like someone will cut him off, and of course it's like that person's just a jerk, right? But if he accidentally cuts someone off, it's like, well, it's just because I'm in a hurry, right? But if
Right.
somebody else cuts you off, you're like, they're just a jerk, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I'm always, that goes with the self-serving bias that kind of.
Explain that a little bit, because the fundamental attribution error, I've always, since I first learned about it, some 20 years ago, I find it very fascinating, and it kind of relates to a situation where a friend of mine once said how it's funny how, when he realizes he was the cause of something, how understandable it all becomes. Like you're looking like, "Oh, what's this damn mess?" And then you point out, well, you were the one that actually did it, and and then all of a sudden it's really an understandable thing. So what is that, the fundamental attribution error?
So when someone, I mean, like a very basic way of saying it, it's like we tend to overemphasize personal internal characteristics when someone does something to us, right? Like the driving example, like the person's driving like a maniac in some way, right? Just because they're fundamentally not a good person. There's something internal within themselves that is causing that. And then they're kind of, the fundamental attribution error and the self-serving bias kind of go hand in hand. But when it comes to ourselves, like when we do something, like we fail a test, right? Or we just do something really badly. We're like, oh, I was just having an off day, or the teacher, she just really doesn't like me. Or we tend to blame more environmental factors for things when it comes to us doing something sort of wrong. But if we do something really well, we tend to say, oh, it's because I'm just really smart, or I'm just really competent, or so it's fascinating. And I mean, I love trying to catch myself doing it, because I it's driving, it happens a lot, and I just have to, I have to constantly be catching myself and saying, look, that person's probably, they could be on the way to the hospital, or you never know the situation they're in. And it's really trying to step back and it's kind of like that old saying of trying to walk in someone else's shoes. You don't know what they're going through, those kind of things. But it is our human tendency seems to be, if someone does something to us, to blame it on internal characteristics. But if we mess
Yeah.
up, we seem to blame it on environmental factors. That's it in a
Yeah.
nutshell.
The confirmation bias, I made it a point early on in my studies that I would read things that I knew were conflicting with what I believed. Part of that was I started out, I don't know, started, but years ago, I was a Christian. So I forced myself to read things that were critical of Christianity. Similarly with Judaism and just a theistic worldview in general, to where I'm now an atheist. But I remember in each step where I was having to change my mind, it was such a level of discomfort. And I guess that's that cognitive dissonance that you're talking about. And so when we're faced with that cognitive dissonance, that sort of two contradictions, coinciding, I think there's two ways that you can resolve it, right? Either it's suppress the opinion or change it, right? It's something along those lines. What exactly are your options at dealing with something like cognitive
Yeah, I mean,
dissonance?
you generally have to like try to change your feelings about it or change your opinion about it, right? Like you have to come to terms with the fact that, okay, I no longer believe in Christianity, even though it was something that was a strongly held belief, for example. Or you're going to say, well, I may have read that stuff, and from a logical, rational perspective, Christianity is hard to, for me to come to terms with the fact that it's the real truth or whatever. But I know how that my feelings about it are this way, and I still consider myself a Christian. And you like talk your way around it, rationalize yourself, right? You rationalize how you can come to terms with the fact that your logical, rational brain doesn't really believe the core tenets of Christianity, but you identify as a Christian, right? Like that kind of thing. It's like, again, it's a mental gymnastics with cognitive dissonance. And I think that it's fascinating to understand. I don't know the research on this, but I would imagine there's differences between, if like the big five personality characteristics, like openness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, extroversion, I'm forgetting one, and agreeableness. Those are like like the big five of personality, and that seem to be somewhat universal. I would imagine that people that are higher on like the openness dimension of personality are more likely to be able to deal with shifting their perspective when it comes to cognitive dissonance, but I'm not sure of that. I don't know. Recent events, in the past few years have made me question some of those things, but it's really a matter of that mental gymnastics you have to come to terms with, because we can't live in that discomfort, right? We can't for a short period of time. It's, again, that uncertainty is really, really hard. You wanted to say either I am a Christian or I'm not a Christian. That in between part is actually harder for most people. And that I think that's why you've got a lot of people that think that, that are, I think more people are still religious, but then there's more and more people that are atheists. I think some people that like questioning, I just don't know, is a harder position to be in for a long term. Do you know what I mean? Did you find that with yourself? Did you find that like going from being a Christian to becoming an atheist, like being in the in-between, like I'm not really sure, was like a harder until you came to terms with what you believed?
Um, I want to say yes, but there was a particular book that I read that sort of ripped that possibility out from underneath me. And what his point was if you're in a situation where you say you don't know, then by definition, you're an atheist. Because what he was saying was belief is a positive state of mind. It means you accept something to be true. If you're not sure, then you by definition don't accept it to be true, which would make you an atheist. And I couldn't, his argument was, airtight. So that kind of rescued me from, it didn't matter whether I knew or not. The point was, if I didn't know,
I know I don't believe, right? Like that's
yeah,
the thing. Okay,
yes, yeah.
that's an interesting way to look at it, I
But
guess.
there's certainly, I certainly, that's just one particular issue, but there certainly are issues where I need resolution. Not knowing is never easy for me. Like I'm very obsessive anyway. So I need closure, like to have like an open, let's close that circle and figure this thing out.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to that evolutionary kind of perspective. I like uncertainty is our greatest fear. Like as human beings, we want like not knowing and not knowing what's going to happen. Like it's just and I see it over and over again, like you were saying. And I find I do it myself, right? Like, I'm like, it's that those big decisions in life. It's like, you're not 100% sure whether you should make it, but it's almost like you just feel better getting it done, right? Like you just feel better getting that decision made. But it's really hard. I mean, I've struggled going back to the religious issue. I'm not a religious person. I'd say I wouldn't fully call myself an atheist. I'll have to get the name of the book that you read there, but I consider myself more of, an agnostic. I grew up Catholic. But when I was 13 years old, I said I'm not getting confirmed, right? So like
Uh-oh.
my questioning of things started early in life. And uh and then I took lots of religion classes, and I see I definitely I am very positive about religion and Christian. And I think of a lot of Christianity is how it probably guides me because of my upbringing and everything. But like with you, like I had a hard time coming to terms with some of the, I don't know. I don't like I don't find myself fully aligned with many aspects, right? But I'm not fully ready to say I don't believe that there is a possibility. Because to me, like my rational mind goes to evidence in the natural world doesn't exist for something coming from nothing very often, right?
Mhm.
Right. So is there some sort of force back there that is inexplicable to humans at this point in time that may have been the impetus for the creation of everything. I don't know, maybe. But I'm kind of like one of those people that on those big questions, I am okay with being uncertain. But I definitely find that most people are not. And I feel like that's a really
It is.
uncomfortable state for most people.
It
So
really is. Now, there were a couple reasons that I was very interested in having somebody on to discuss this topic. And the first one, and they're both kind of they're definitely on social media, but they seem to me very prevalent today. The first one is the political tribalism that it seemed to have. It seems it to me anyway, that people get into their tribes and they just defend their side no matter what. And one of the best examples I've ever seen of this was years ago. Roger Clemens was testifying before Congress because he was accused of using steroids. So they hauled him before Congress, and all the Republicans sided with him, and all the Democrats went against him. And there was no ideological reason why that should have happened. I mean, it was steroids and it's a baseball player. There was no politics involved, but yet the groups still went into their tribes. And today, I see it especially with Donald Trump, but it's certainly not limited to Republicans. But that is just the most salient to me. But how do these cognitive biases, if they do at all, but how would they explain or help to explain that type of tribalism?
yeah, well, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that people have taken on like political beliefs as part of their identity. Like it's become like a core value. Again, I can give some examples from family members. It's like, and like this, I've belonged to this political party all my life. So did my parents, right? This is who I am. It doesn't matter that the belief system of that political party is no longer in alignment with what it once was. Like I look at these things just like you're saying. I don't know the Roger Clemens example, but I can think of other examples where it doesn't make sense that the Republicans lined up this way and the Democrats lined up this way based on what my understanding of sort of right wing versus left wing, especially in the United States at least, ideologies are all about. Like the concept of groupthink, that's another psychological term we haven't really touched on, is really important. And once you get into these members of a group that they just want to promote harmony, their identity is, I'm a part of this group, I just want to promote harmony. There's all kinds of psychological mechanisms like a collective rationalization, stereotyping of outsiders, right? You can think about this right now, like go click, anything on X is the same way, like you're saying, whether you're, supporting Donald Trump or now Kamala Harris, and like you just see these things and it's like immediately you demonize the other side. And I like to think it's sort of interesting for me because I grew up in a family, like I played soccer in college, I was really into sports, but I never really got really into understanding like disliking teams for one reason or another. And I'm from a family that's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and everyone is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, right? And then not, you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and you think that like players and people and fans from like the Baltimore Ravens are a certain way, and it's like you've taken on this identity of this is what I am, right? And that out group bias thing is they're like this. I'm going to stereotype them this way. And it's not just, we see it more with political issues, but it happens in all kinds of different groups, right? Like it happens, with sports types groups, or, even, I mean, like just smaller examples of just something that you are affiliated with and another person is not affiliated with. It's that in-group, out-group bias and taking on as your identity those political beliefs. And I do feel like I have a pretty decent background and like political issues and understanding politics, but it's not like my forte, so to speak. But I wonder how much different it is now. We think it's different. We think it's worse, right? We think it's worse than it's ever been, but I don't know that it is,
Oh,
like,
I don't think that. I think
but a
it's
lot of people do. A lot of
no,
people are
I hear
so
that. Yeah.
terrible, right?
But
Like
no,
it's
I don't think
everything's
that.
worse now,
But
right?
with the Trump phenomenon, it has reached the highest point in my lifetime where people will not criticize him. He can say one thing and then completely contradict him, and people will defend him on both as if there was no inconsistency at all. But you pointed out, I think you mentioned stereotyping, the out group, in group, out group thinking, group think. It seems as if there can be almost a perfect storm of these cognitive biases that lead to this type of dynamic.
Oh, totally. And I think it's important to note, I think you're right on the Trump supporter side, but I have seen just as much on the other side with they call it the Trump derangement syndrome. Like,
Yeah.
Trump can say something that someone is completely in agreement with, right? But just because it comes out of Trump's mouth,
Yes.
disagree with it.
Yeah.
Right. And is someone that's sort of, I'm not ideological in that respect. I definitely have beliefs about issues, and I have to figure out which ones are more important because there's no political side or person or that actually represents everything I feel, right? But I don't understand how that, I don't like, it's really hard, right? Like if you're someone who's rational, it's hard to understand how you can't be like willing to criticize, like you're saying, like why are there people that are not willing to criticize Trump even when they obviously disagree with him?
Yeah.
That goes into a really kind of scary, interesting uh there's some interesting research I read a long time ago about, there are just certain types of personalities that do tend to, want to follow, you know strong types of leaders that they see as strong no matter what, right? There seems to be a certain personality type that no matter that of individuals that will do exactly what you're saying. And I see that on both political sides though, right? I see it. I come from a family that is, um, not all of them, but generally very left leaning. And I see it on that side just as much as I see
Yeah. Well,
like,
I saw it amongst Democrats. The closest I saw as far as what goes on with Trump was with Obama. When Obama came on, they sort of looked at him as almost like a messiah-like
yeah,
figure.
totally.
And these people are politicians. You know what I mean? And to from my perspective, just to idolize politicians is just sick right from the get-go. But I do agree it happens. It can happen anywhere. I just think that with Trump, it seems to have magnified. And there are people I agree with you that I hate the term Trump derangement syndrome only because I've been accused of having it so many times.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing. The interesting thing to me about this is traditionally and ideologically, I would be closer to what somebody would call a Republican, even though I'm not. I'm more of a libertarian, but I'm a constitutional originalist. Uh, let's cut taxes, deregulate the economy, pro Second Amendment. I would have supported in 2016 any Republican but Trump And yet people tell me I got Trump derangement syndrome, I'm a liberal, I'm I'm a communist, whatever. But then when I criticize the other day, I criticized Kamala Harris, and somebody that I've respected for a long, long time as a psychologist and an author. Michael, how could you criticize Kamala? Don't you know that Trump is the worst threat? So I mean, I've been criticized by both sides, which tells me that there's something going on beyond just positions, that it's a very tribal
Oh,
mentality.
totally. And I think you're right. It's like a perfect storm of a lot of these different cognitive biases in a time of social media. And not just social media, I've been focusing on that too much, but I'm 47, right? Like I can think back to what the news was like a long time ago. And I think that it has changed dramatically. Not all news, right? But and maybe I've changed dramatically, but I don't, I have two boys, 14 and 17, and my 17-year-old's very interested in politics. Um, and we do fun things like watch the different like coverage of the same issue across different news channels. It's just crazy to see, right? Like you watch CNN and MSNBC versus Fox News. And I don't know some of the other ones. I'm trying blanking on like some of the other sort of right-wing kind, or just podcasts and things like that. And again, it goes to that confirmation bias. And they turn on, if you're left-leaning, you only turn on MSNBC and that's all you're seeing, and you've done that for years, like it's really hard to break in to talk to those people, just as the same as if it's someone who's watched more right-leaning media for the past 10, 20 years. How do you break in? How do you break in and like get it?
I'm hoping you can tell us
Well,
in a little
well,
while.
I do try to figure that one out. I'm not saying I have a lot of success. I have success sometimes, but it's like, how do you, and I think about myself even, because I've definitely politically changed. And what are the things that opened my eyes a bit? And I think it's just being willing to take in different news sources, being like that, going back to that, breaking away from that confirmation bias and being willing to kind of start looking at all different sources of information. And I think this starts at a young age. Like I think we have to like go back and think about, I mean, we're like I'm trying to encourage my parents, right, to look at different news sources. And it's a little bit of a losing battle, although I try to like, what's it called? Like pebbling them. You give them little like, like little things here and there that are kind of at their level where they kind of might start questioning and looking into things themselves. But I think, from the perspective of how can we change the trajectory we're on, might be too late for the boomers. Sorry, no, just kidding. But like thinking about, and I wrote an article, I don't know if you saw about this one. I think this was around when you reached out to me, like thinking just about debate education as being fundamentally important, right? Not just like formal debate, but being willing to have hard conversations and debating in your own family. Like I found, like I grew up in a family where we did debate a lot and we lots of arguing and stuff like that. And that was like the norm. But I know lots of other families where that isn't the norm, right? And like, I think people, whenever there's anyone who um, has different beliefs, we have a tendency, like there's certain, I don't know if it's cultural variables, you tend to not want to, you want to just shut down, you want to not talk about it, you want to just be agreeable, those kind of things. And I think figuring out from an early age how to encourage more of those skills, like coming to a discussion and having evidence to support your beliefs, right? Because so many people now, it's just like, well, that's just what I feel is the right thing, right? And that kind of thing drives me
Me too.
nuts, right? And it just drives me nuts. And I had just, I'm not going to call out this family member who I had a disagreement about a political issue in the past few weeks. And she's like, well, I can't even talk to you because all you're doing is talking about the evidence says this and the evidence says that. And this is someone who's college educated, right? Like, I don't like, I think we have to figure out how that becomes an important component of learning earlier on in life, right? So we homeschool our kids, and well, my older son is now like out of college. He went to college really young, but like so much of why we homeschool is because this was important to us, right? Like we wanted our kids to like be able to be challenged, to be able to hear all different points of view, not just one, because I was a psychologist in the schools before, right? So that was what my background was. We wanted to encourage this, like, question things, don't just accept the narrative. It's okay if you, it's hard as a parent, right? Because sometimes you're like, just be quiet, sit down and listen to me, right? But like for us, it was really important to be like, well, does that make sense? Can you tell me, if you believe that, what is the evidence that you have for that? And I think we have to start doing that from an earlier age
Yeah.
than than later on, right? Like,
Yeah.
understand, that's one of the many things I think that raising awareness about cognitive biases in general from a young age. I was teaching for a few years, I was teaching high school level students online, like introductory psychology. And I feel like that's a really good time to start introducing things like conformity and groupthink and confirmation bias, as they're going through these time periods where they're like so susceptible to those, like conformity being, the conforming pressures of all their peers. But that's not something I would say a majority of like high school level kids are actually being exposed to, but I think it's extraordinarily important.
Do you think cognitive biases play a role in conspiratorial thinking or conspiracy theories?
Yes. Yeah, I definitely do. I think, have you ever, like, maybe you've heard like the term patternicity, right? Like there's, and that's sort of a cognitive bias where you start seeing, have you ever seen like, go and Google the similarities between, I think it's Lincoln and Kennedy, right? Have you ever done that?
I have. I
Right.
haven't Googled it, but I've seen it years ago.
Yeah,
They
you
one
see it
was
presented, and there's all kinds of
yeah.
examples like that. And you start looking at that and you're like, there's some like widespread government, right? Like it's easy to go down those rabbit holes. But on the other hand, like I feel like conspiracy theory has been thrown around so much that there are
And
definitely
that's part of the
conspiracy
problem.
theories that
Sure.
are true, right? Like
Yeah.
things that people were like, that's a conspiracy theory that's going to happen. We could talk about like COVID and things that in that from that realm, and that they ended up being true. So then that sort of confirmed, see, I told you the government was doing this. And so then that opens like a can of worms that you start distrusting everything. It's like this balance of knowing,
Yeah.
it is.
See, a big issue that I have with conspiratorial thinking is I'm okay with skepticism and saying I'm not going to trust the official narrative. But what conspiracy theorists do is they then plug in an alternative narrative that doesn't have evidence for it either. And in terms of what we're talking about, I think the confirmation bias is huge because not only, but also you said patternicity, the human inclination to see patterns or to search out patterns. So, but with the confirmation bias, I had a friend of mine who's no longer a friend of mine because of this stuff, but and he made a claim, and I said, okay, I just Googled your claim, and it says the claim is false. He says, well, of course, because you're using Google. They're in on it. So he says you have to go to DuckDuckGo. So I went to DuckDuckGo and I found the same thing that what he was saying was just not true. And I told him that. And he says, no, you have to keep looking. And I'm just like, okay, so I'm have to keep looking until I find the source that tells me what you want me to think. And then that's how we're going to judge whether the source is credible. We're not judging a source's credibility based on independent criteria. We're judging a source's credibility based on the answer it provides. And that seems it seems dangerous to me, but it also
Oh,
seems like these cognitive biases are playing a substantial role.
it is like this weird cycle. And this goes back again to things that I think that we should teach younger people, like just understanding how to evaluate credible sources of evidence, right?
Right.
And that is, you can't overstate how important that is. Understanding, like when you're reading something and like very basic concepts and research methods and statistics, like understanding the difference between correlation and causation, understanding those kind of things. Talk to people, ask them, people do not, they'll be like, oh yeah, I saw, coffee causes people to get 1,600 on their SATs, right? Like something like that. Like people, and you start trying to evaluate what they might understand about, the difference between like simple things like correlation and causation, and it's really problematic. But yeah, it's a I think what you were saying, it's like this perfect storm of all these different variables at this point in time that we're seeing. And I think if your eyes are open, I definitely don't want to use the term red pilled because that's
Oh my God, please don't.
overused, right? But the term, like, if your eyes are open to like seeing like, okay, how can people that are this supposed to be like politically on the right be like supportive of these aspects of, the Trump Vance policy that is obviously not right wing at all, right? Or are the opposite on the left, right? Like in terms of, I don't, whatever the issue is, like pro-choice in terms of vaccines, whatever. Like if your eyes are open and you're just like, what is going on? And it goes back to that, like trumping all of these, the reason. And I used to think that there was more of a disparity between people that were of sort of higher intellect versus, others that wouldn't fall prey to these, but that is not true. The smartest people fall prey to these cognitive biases. Like it is absolutely fascinating. There does not seem to be a correlation between your ability to fall prey to cognitive biases or even conspiracy theories in some way, and your actual, measured IQ, so to speak. But it's I don't know, it's just a fascinating thing if you are, as apparently it seems like you are, and you're like, how do these groups of people go together, right? They don't even have the same beliefs. It's just that they wear the same team jacket, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like they just want to be on the same team. But there's this whole I started talking a little bit about this need for affiliation that I think is very, very prominent among people. And I think that goes into the religious thing too, sports teams, right? Political teams, so to speak. And I think there's a small segment of the population that doesn't need that. I mean, what's your perspective? Do you think there are more people that need that group affiliation to feel like they're a part of their team? They're a part of a
Oh
team? Or do you
wow.
think that there's
I don't know. I'm very hesitant to draw conclusions because much of my thinking on these subjects is guided by my experience on social media.
hmm,
And I'm well aware that my social media feed, it's based on algorithms and who sends me friend requests or follows me. And it doesn't seem, and it could be for an abundance of reasons, that when I go out in public, I don't experience the same thing. Now, it could just be because people get a lot more ballsy when they're, over the internet. Oh, it could be that people just are nicer in person, or it could just be that I'm not coming across the same people. So I don't know, but I definitely know that there's this tendency that people have to, they fall into groups. The groups do then become their identity, like as a religious person or as a political party or as a conspiracy oriented person, where that now is who they are. And one big thing that I've noticed, especially with the conspiracy theorists, is they have a real difficult time with thinking, with understanding that not everything has an intention behind it. It's they seem to have to explain things in terms of intention. Like when Kobe Bryant's plane crashed, somebody said, "You think that was an accident?" Like they just can't accept that there's accidents in the world. But what they're, I think, failing to realize is when you look at into probabilities, the idea that there's all these people coming together to make this stuff happen, it just somebody's going to tell, somebody's going to leak it. It's not going to go that way. People just don't keep secrets that well. And people die. Another a friend of mine's friend recently died, and he was young, 50 years old, and somebody said, "Oh, did he get the jab?" I mean, the vaccine. Well, even if we granted your premise that the vaccine is deadly, which I don't, by the way, but I'm just saying, even if I granted that, do you think that people can't just die? That there always has to be some
right.
grand thing behind it. And it's bizarre to me, but it's common enough that it's obvious that this is a real dynamic occurring
Problem?
in people's minds. Oh, a problem
A
too. Yeah.
real problem. I mean, I think this goes back to that concept of uncertainty and like many people, I don't know if it's most or many, have a real significant, and I don't see this across, I mean, like from political, I don't see it like being one political side versus another, but have a problem with just accepting that there's like kind of just chaos that happens, right? That we can't control everything. There's a definite personality type that wants to think that everything happens for a reason, and that there is some meaning, larger meaning behind it, and that it's really hard for those people to accept that sometimes, things just randomly happen.
And
And
that's it. Yeah. I think
and
that part of it might be too, it just occurred to me now that if I can say that there's somebody behind or some cabal behind all the bad things that are happening, well, then all I really have to do is stop that cabal. As difficult as it might be, I can identify the they behind everything, stop them, and then good will just happen rather than accepting that no, bad things just happen in this world.
and bad things can happen to good people.
Yes.
That is so hard, right? Like it's so,
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard, it's just hard thing to, and good on the other side of it. I mean, I think good things happen to bad people. Like,
Sure.
there's there is
Sure.
definitely some of that, but it is this like, because we don't want to feel like it was really that uncertainty. We don't want to feel uncertain that we can't identify something as the reason for why it could happen, because then it could happen to me, right? Like
Exactly.
if I could, then it makes me feel like I have some control over it. And I think that is definitely, people want to feel like they have control. It's better for them to come up with some conspiracy theory than to say, I just have no explanation for why something like that could happen to Kobe Bryant, or why 300,000 people could die in a tsunami, right? Or why, like they have to have some sort of um they have to be able to apply some sort of meaning to it. And I think going back, I was thinking a little bit about what you were saying about the difference between how people interact with you in real life versus on social media. And that's another psychological, like the whole de-individuation, right? Like that
Yeah.
you are able to like have some anonymity. It definitely significantly changes people's behavior, and usually for the worse, right?
Yeah.
I think
For sure.
that's like one of those things we haven't come to terms with how to deal with, right? From on the one hand, I'm someone who's politically, like I have all beliefs all over the place, but I definitely think the government should be involved in everything a bit less, right? But I do think there's a place for um government involvement in certain things, and to what extent should we be able to be completely anonymous, and if we're I don't all those things are hard things to sort out, but I know that those are um issues that I'm glad I'm not the one who has to make the decisions. But yeah, I just think the de-individuation, and it is kind of a good reminder always to think about like what if you are super pulled into like the social media world, to go outside and talk to people in real life and realize that um the political like discourse is not the same generally. Maybe it is for some people, but it's not the same in person versus online.
Yeah.
I definitely, and trying to, I try to, there was a point in time when I did get very upset with, like, I guess a long time ago, like when Facebook was newer and all that, and you'd see someone post something and you just get like so upset about it. And I don't feel like that anymore. And
That's good.
I don't let it, I have family members that have extraordinarily different beliefs than I do, like close, like sisters. And so, but I just have made the decision. That's not, I love my sister. I'm not going to let that affect that. I think she's wrong in certain regards, but I understand why she has those beliefs. She's wrong, but no, I'm just kidding. But it's problematic because, but you know what, that the difference is I don't see my political beliefs as my identity. I am not defined by like one cloak of I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican or I'm a libertarian or I'm a Christian or I'm a whatever, right? Like I just don't. So it's easy. I feel like it's easier for me to be like questioning people across different groups, and not, I hope that doesn't come off as like sounding like that somehow. Um, I don't think it's like superior. I just don't, I've just never been a person who needs to feel that affiliation. So when we went back to that question, and I feel like that's made me very different. Like when I said all my family members, like super gung-ho Steelers, I never felt that way. I never really understood it. And I see that as I've grown, right, over the decades, I see that across many different things, like I played soccer in college, but I wasn't like super into like just hanging out with the soccer team, or I wasn't super into, and I do come across people that are like that, but it feels like there's a lot of people really, really, and I think it's part of who we are as human beings. Maybe I'm broken in some way, right? That there's this need to be on some sort of team, right? And it's that tribal, back our evolutionary history. We had to be on a team to stay protected back in the caveman days, right? Like
Sure.
we had to be on a team. And if we decided we were the one who were gonna be like, oh, I don't really believe the same things as my team, I'm gonna walk out into the forest, we'd get killed. So for most of us, for most of human history, that probably happened. Right. So evolutionary selection over time probably selected for more tribalism, right? So
Yeah, I think that a lot of us could learn that we're no longer in those environments. That the things that worked for a caveman aren't going to work for us and aren't right for us. Jessica, is there anything that you think that we should have covered in relation to cognitive biases that I let slip by?
um I'm I'm not thinking of anything. Just in terms of like combating them, I think just raising awareness, talking about them, and that's why I write about them a lot from my blog at Psychology Today. I try to proselytize to anyone who will listen, right? Like, about them. Just yourself taking the time to say, like I have this strong belief in, the government shouldn't be as involved in as many things, but, I'm willing to say maybe in this aspect of this domain of life, perhaps it makes more sense. There's nuance in this issue or something like that. It's just constantly questioning yourself as well. It's easy to point out the biases in everyone else. I love to do it on Twitter, but it's a harder thing for all of us. And like with everything, if we can start making those changes within ourselves, it'll kind of spread a little. But I just think becoming more aware and encouraging debate and
I
dissent,
agree.
okay with it, right?
Yes.
Not being
So
so offended, right?
yeah,
I'm someone who's not, I'm very thick-skinned. I'm not
yes,
offended.
let's get rid of the sensitivity. I agree with you 100% there. So you mentioned Psychology Today. That's where I found you. Is there anywhere else people can find you? Do you have a website?
I do have a website. It's just KoehlerAcademy.com, spelled my last name, Koehler, academy.com. But Psychology Today, I'm on X, LinkedIn, kind of posting different things. But it'd be great if people decided to follow my blog, or reach out to me in any way.
Oh, you have a blog too?
Well, the blog at Psychology Today.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to share with us and to talk about this, what I think is a very important issue.
I'm so happy to be here. I think it's an extraordinarily important issue. And like I said, I think it's something, the more that we can talk about it and help raise awareness that we have these biases, and it's not like a negative thing, right? That we all have them. We all do this. And the more aware we are, the better. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. Till next time.